Okay, guys, let's react to some more preseason stuff, and we are going to go right to the Chet and iHeart lineup. It's been two preseason games, one against the Spurs, one against the Rockets. We saw it in both of those. And for me, the immediate things to note are OKC is still allowing iHeart to be a hub around the top of the key or the free throw line for handoff actions, whether it be like flipping into Isaiah Joe, who's on the move, or him and Chet playing off each other directly, like Chet flowing into a handoff action with iHeart too, and then, obviously Chet is talented enough to then make the next play. Or I think there's been like one Chet iHeart pick and roll so far that I've seen. I remember one play, I think it was the Houston game, where Chet cut from the corner off of iHeart having the ball around the free throw line, and they actually went for the lob. He got fouled. And so, like, when that pairing is out there, sure, there's going to be some times when you just see like simple iHeart SGA or iHeart J-Dub two-man game and Chet is the floor spacer. But it's clear that Daignault wants those two playing off of each other as well, which is really cool. Defensively, it looks pretty much exactly as you would have imagined, which is iHeart has been on, in the Spurs game, he was on Sohan because Wemby wasn't playing, so Sohan was effectively the 5. And I remember Chet being on Malachi Branham for some of those minutes. And then in the Rockets game, it was more so iHeart on Şengün and then Chet on like either Tari Eason or a little bit of Cam Whitmore. And I don't want to get too ahead of myself because we got a whole regular season playoffs to get to because OKC is going to win a crap ton of games. Could be the 1 seed in the West. But man, it looks so good already. Like the rim protection of iHeart and then Chet being able to just move so well. He can close out. He can help in the paint and then still close out to somebody on the perimeter. I think there's been a play or two where like iHeart is higher up on a screen and then Chet just becomes the help dude on the back line. Like there's so many options. It's so much size. iHeart's grabbed 1 million rebounds already in these 2 games. He's played like less than 20 minutes in each of the games. Now, with all that said, they are still starting these games with Chet at center. I expect that to be what it is the majority of the time. For certain playoff matchups down the road, whatever, it would not shock me to see iHeart just starting some games. Of course, they also got Caruso, and that's a big deal as well. Just another guy to wreak havoc on the perimeter with all their deflections and stuff. But for me, it's just been so much of anticipating the Chet iHeart lineup. Shout out to Caruso. Obviously he's going to be really good for him. Now let's talk about the Wolves. We have still not seen Julius Randle, but I think there's enough interesting things to look at with their offense. I was mostly paying attention to their last one against the Knicks. A lineup with DiVincenzo and Naz Reid in the game, with Ant, Gobert, and Jaden. That's a pretty spaced out floor. With the one caveat of we do wish Jaden could get his three-point rate up a little more. And it should be said, while, of course, Naz Reid is not the player that Karl Anthony Towns was, strictly from a three-point rate standpoint, last season, Naz Reid took more threes per minute than Cat did, while, of course, shooting over 40% on them. And Naz, he played 24 minutes a game last season. Randle's still going to be the starting 4. I do wonder if the Wolves can find a way to get Naz into like the high 20s in minutes. And in this one against the Knicks, he had 9 3-point attempts in like 20 minutes. And we know DiVincenzo's a gunslinger from out there, and Randle is also going to take some threes, and we'll see what his percentages are. But there's a decent chance the Wolves increase their 3-point attempts this season. Yes, seeing what the spacing looks like with Randle next to Gobert compared to Cat next to Gobert, like that is still a very big question. But between getting 2 good players for 1, and yes, Julius Randle's a good player. I've seen a few crazy takes about Randle on Twitter. I probably just read Twitter too much. The dude was an all-star last year, let's not forget. DiVincenzo and just all of his shooting, Naz getting more 3-point attempts, the financial flexibility long-term, all that stuff. We also got to see DiVincenzo just making plays with the ball. We saw him run screens with Gobert. We saw like little back-and-forth plays with like him and Ant that would then lead into like a Gobert screen with DiVincenzo, or even like DiVincenzo flying off of some of these off-ball screens from Naz or Gobert. And he did have a couple of great passes that were kickouts to Ant for threes off of Gobert screening for DiVincenzo. And I think Ant had like 4 or 5 catch-and-shoot threes in this game, which I think is great. Yeah, Ant is still going to take a good amount of his threes off the dribble, but him getting more good catch-and-shoots, you love that. So DiVincenzo being able to run some more actions as a ball handler, that could help. Of course, DiVincenzo is not going to run your whole offense. Ant's still going to get his off-the-dribble threes. Conley is still your starting point guard. We'll see how ready Dillingham is. He's obviously had minutes in this preseason. And again, we are still waiting to see Randle. All right, now let's talk DeMar on the Kings, who just had a weird blowout loss to the Blazers. With a lot of turnovers and missed threes, Kings fans just pretend that game didn't happen. I think the most noticeable thing with DeMar on the Kings already is just how he's been able to play off of Sabonis. There's been DHOs, there's been simple screens, there's been a off-ball screen set for DeMar by Keon, or I think there might have been like one from De'Aaron Fox that just allows DeRozan to flow into those Sabonis DHOs, and then from there it's just DeRozan be DeRozan. And in these arrangements where Sabonis is looking to run a handoff action, and then you've got like DeRozan getting a screen off the ball from either Keon or Keegan or Fox, it does allow like multiple guys to either flash out or cut. Of course, Malik Monk can exist in this as well. Kevin Huerter, if he has a bounce-back season, he can definitely play in all this. We've seen him already do it for this Kings team. They've gotten Keon as well as Keegan threes off of this action. You've gotten at least one Sabonis roll to the rim that I remember exactly. DeMar's also gotten a couple of cuts on the baseline where he and Sabonis fake the DHO. So it's nothing too complex, but the Kings, they just needed another scoring option last year with Kevin Huerter's down season and with Harrison Barnes' production just going down. To recap, they were first in offense 2 years ago. They were 13th last year. And then as far as the defense, I was looking at the Warriors games. It's Keon on Steph and it's Keegan Murray on Jonathan Kuminga, at least in the first game. Second game, the lineups were a little different for the Warriors, so the matchups were a little different, but you get it. And then, of course, you got switching off the ball and all that stuff. They ended up as a middle-of-the-pack defense last year, and that was with Keon Ellis kind of transforming some of their lineup numbers later on in the season. Their three-point rate has been lower in this preseason, although they had one game where they took nearly a million. I know DeRozan doesn't take a lot of threes, but, they were like third in three-point attempts last year. We have seen one preseason game of Paul George on the Sixers versus an NBA team, but Embiid didn't play, so my takeaway from the game was nothing. But shout out to PG. Kind of a similar feeling with Clay. He went 3 for 9, 3 for 5 from 3. It is wild to see him in a Dallas jersey and not a Warriors one. He took a bunch of normal Clay shots. Defensively, he was actually pretty good versus the Jazz, where he locked up Jordan Clarkson or stayed with Colin Sexton on some screens. He even had a couple of good one-on-one possessions on Markkanen. I want to be clear, this is not me believing that Klay Thompson is going to go 6 years in the past on defense. But for this one preseason game in October where he was at, I imagine, 100%, the defense was pretty good. So there you go. Now let's go back to the Spurs. Talked about Stephon Castle in that rookie video. So Chris Paul and Wemby have played one preseason game together. And in the beginning of the game, right at the start, as well as the beginning of the third quarter, it did feel like they were really leaning on the Wemby-Chris Paul pick and roll. And then after a few minutes in, they would go more to Wemby in the post or Wemby screening for somebody else or whatever. This was against the Magic, which was a little funny for me because it's Chris Paul's first game at his age. First game of preseason, here's Jalen Suggs. Have fun. Anyway, what type of shots did the Spurs get out of the Wemby-Chris Paul two-man game? There was a little stretch where Chris took back-to-back pull-up threes, made one, missed one. You've had Sohan getting an open three, Champagnie got an open three, Wemby got a pick-and-pop three. Wemby was wide open at the free throw line off of one of these, and then he got blocked because the entire Magic defense collapsed on him, but the corner was wide open. I think it was Harrison Barnes. That's cool. Hopefully Devin Vassell's not out for too long because obviously him existing around that two-man game and then him having his own two-man game with Wemby is the best shot they got. Keldon will get his chances to score off of that two-man game as well. We did get one vintage Chris Paul toying with the big guy in the Magic game. It was against Goga where he just ISO'd him and just took a mid-ranger, went right in. And I don't know how many of those Chris Paul has left in his career, not making a mid-range, but more so again, just toying with the big guy and knowing whatever shot I want to get to right now, I can get to. Oh yeah, and of course, we got the lob, the Chris to Wemby lob on the empty side action. How can I forget that one? They also did run one inverted screen with Chris screening for Wemby. What else is there that's new that I haven't talked about this preseason? Oh yeah, I got to do a little Donovan Clingan something because he's actually played a couple games now. Of course, his main thing is protecting the basket. I thought in his second game, he looked a little better at that than the first one. Second one was against the Kings. First one was the Clipper game. There were just more plays where DeMar or Keon would kick out with Clingan just around the basket. He probably had his best defensive play of the preseason so far in the Kings game where he was going about as fast as maybe he can go in the full court to contest DeMar from behind, and DeMar kind of freaked out and had to kick out. He had a good block on, I think it was Malik Monk in that game. In the first game against the Clippers, I thought his timing on contests as well as his footing was just a little off to where the Clippers were able to score a good amount of times around the rim with him at the basket, whether it was Kobe Brown or Kevin Porter Jr. or, Kai Jones got open on a couple screen plays just behind him. And to be fair, those can sometimes be a product more so of lack of help, but if you're dropping on screens, typically the idea is you're not bringing heavy help. But anyway, in that game, he still had good contests on floaters that just happened to go in, but I thought he did fine. He had a couple good defensive possessions on Zoo in the post. And then as far as his offense, I think his screen setting's been good. He's pulled off some nice passes on the roll or out of the post that I've thought have been fine, especially in the first game. He had a nice looking three in the first game as well. And apparently he blocked Sabonis in the Kings game, but the camera angle from the broadcast was so bad that you just can't see it at all, so that's cool. Let's talk about Brandon Clark, who is back. He did play 6 games at the end of last season for the Grizzlies. An Achilles injury is no joke. He's played 2 preseason games. We've already gotten a number of signature Brandon Clark floaters, screening for either Ja, Marcus, Scottie Pippen Jr., but he also went 2 for 5 from 3. All of them were out of the corner, and when you look at the attempts, there is still a little bit of I got to set my feet, I got to get the ball in my hands exactly as I want it, so there is still that little pause there, but 2 for 5 from 3 is still 2 for 5 from 3. And if that ever really pops for Brandon Clark, then I think you can start considering him. He already kind of was one of the best role players in the league, but then he really becomes one of the best role players in the league. That's about all I got. As far as established teams, I thought Cleveland had a couple of cool sets to get Evan Mobley on the roll. I thought he also just had a couple of bully ball moments in the early stretch of the Bulls game. The Warriors have a lot of depth, and that can obviously help you in the long regular season. They need Steph to be healthy. They need Draymond to not lose his mind, and they need a jump from Kuminga, and all that might just lead to like 48 wins. I mean, the West is very tough. You want to know what team I'm most confused on right now? It's just the Pelicans. Partially because like Trey Murphy's been out, and I still don't know what the hell their starting five is going to be once Ingram and CJ are both playing, because you just end up in the situation where you're either not playing with a center or one of Ingram or CJ comes off the bench, which means CJ comes off the bench, which means you get a DeJounte, Zion, Ingram, Herb, Daniel Tice starting five. I know there's a little bit of noise about them not going with a conventional center, and yeah, I'm sure we'll see that in some lineups, but just call me crazy. I like it when you have a center on the floor. Now, it would be nice if that guy was better than Daniel Tice. No disrespect to Daniel Tice. Loved him back in 2020 for the Celtics. Whatever. Pelicans confuse me. Trey Murphy, get well soon. Yves Missi got 4 blocks, so that's cool.